I get the sense that, like me, you came here from personal conviction. So I invite you to bring your fullest today. You're in a room that values bravery. I invite you to bring your bravest self today. But to what extent am I responsible for actions of my predecessors? I think a popular question in many worlds right now. Can I pose that to you?
You know, I like to work to break the word responsible down to our ability to respond. So I would say that I am not responsible for the actions of my predecessors, but do I have the ability to respond to the present day consequences of that in ways that elicit and bring about real change, you know? So whether my predecessors were responsible or yours, my charge as a human being is to try to make today a more equitable and fair environment, you know, and that's my charge no matter who my ancestors were. That's what I believe, you know. So to the extent that I am able, that I have resources, that I am privileged enough to be able to respond to current day circumstances in ways that help to move us toward greater equity and fairness. But each of us have our own, you know, we have our own lane, if you will. We have our own ways to do that. I've found my ways to do it. Others, you know, teachers find their ways. Emergency service providers find their ways. But we need to be aware that we are living in a system that is rooted in a pathology that is antiquated and historic, and it is harmful and will inhibit our evolution as a human species if we don't get rid of it and make it right.
Hi, folks. Let's do a quick exercise together. Would you take your notebook out and put your thinking hat on? And I'm going to give you a set of some quick questions, and I'd love for you to reflect and take 5 minutes to think about this and write down any notes that you'd like to recall or keep. Who were your predecessors? Do you know them? How far back do you know them? Do you know the positions that they were in, the actions that they took, or the attitudes that they had? Now, the second part of our exercise. Let's take another 3 to 5 minutes to think about this question, and feel free to journal or take notes as you wish. The systems that your predecessors created or were part of, are we still living in those systems? If you compare then to now, what have we gained, what have we lost, and what has stayed the same? Take another 5 minutes to think about this and journal as you'd like. What type of attitudes do you harbor today? And what type of actions do you take today that are markedly different from those that your predecessors took or did or were able to take and do? Do you think that you seek out more truths, more perspectives, and actively get to know a more diverse set of people than your predecessors did or were able to? So how do we make headway and change those organizations that we are internally part of? And then there's a question from the audience earlier that what have been some effective ways to engage community members where majority feel that racism is not an issue in their community? And so in one situation, you're part of that community and you're working it from the inside. And in the other, you're not necessarily inside the institution, but you're still part of the larger community. But in both situations, there is kind of a denial that racism is an issue. So what are some effective ways, and could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, and definitely, again, and I think the goal has to always be clear in the mind, whether it's in the community that you're working in or within the organization. You know, what is your purpose? If your purpose is to expand your circles of engagement, to build up the political, social will to make the changes, right? We live in democratic societies, many of us, and we work in organizations where people have the power to set the policies, to enforce the policies, you know, to make the changes. So ultimately, you need people to get it. You know, you need people to recognize that this is upside down and we need to fix it. So the work of expanding the circles of engagement becomes so important. So we must apply the principles that we know that invite people in and sustain them in engagement. Calling them racist doesn't do that. Calling them sexist, you know, calling them white supremacists, calling them the problem doesn't necessarily accomplish the goal of getting people to the table and getting them mobilized to take action, you know. So I've been part of organizations that have been predominantly, you know, white organizations for much of my career. But I will tell you the story of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which was a Midwest, predominantly white organization that went on a 30-year journey to try and transform itself. When I joined them, they had been on this journey for 10 years, and they had done diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. They had done many, many types of approaches. I walked into a situation that was very divided, you know, and we brought in the idea of the healing with the tenets that I've described in terms of the affirmation and the belongingness and the consciousness change. There's something about identifying the challenge as the belief system itself, right? That allows me as a person to have, all of us, no matter who we are, to have a common objective. The objective is to eradicate the belief system, not to eradicate a group of people, right? Not to eradicate necessarily an institution, but to eradicate the belief system that gave rise to these structures and systems of oppression. So that is one way I found that people show up, that people feel like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Think of an institution or a community that you're part of. Have you or somebody else in that institution or community brought up racism as an issue? Why did you or that person bring it up, and how was it received by the others? Folks, now we're at part 2 of our second set of reflection questions. And part 2 is, we talked about you or another person bringing up racism in an institution or community that you're part of. Were you or that person able to get the point across? And why do you think others reacted the way that they did? Folks, let's do part 3 of our second set of questions. What was effective about the approach that you or that person who brought up racism? What was effective about the approach? What was not effective about the approach? If you feel that the approach was overall not effective, what would you change, either as the person bringing it up or as a witness to it? What would you change for a better outcome?
I like to think of the work of racial healing as the work of building and affirming the connective tissue that we need in order to stay in the work. We as human beings are social by our design, by our natural design, and we need to be connected with one another. And so in the racial healing circles that we do, the RX racial healing circles, we immediately move to establish an environment that is physiologically helping to reduce our stress response and to affirm our humanity. So we've got a couple of prompts that we're gonna break you into small groups and into dyads where you talk with one another. and respond to the prompt. Just answer the questions. And we'll come back afterwards and talk about it. So the first question that you're being asked to share is a brief story, and I do want to emphasize story here, about a positive moment of awe that you have personally experienced during recent weeks and months. In the midst of all of this, there have been moments where I'm sure you've experienced awe. I have to say, when 20,000 people in Paris stood up for George Floyd, for Black Lives Matter in America, that just was a moment of awe and unbelievable change for me. And then some of you will be asked to share a brief story about a person in your life that has had a very strong positive influence. I mentioned earlier about Frederick Douglass. He is very much a hero of mine in terms of that he escaped from being enslaved to being the most well-known abolitionist in this country. And so it could be a figure from history, it could be someone very personally connected in your life, but share a story with the person in your breakout about someone who's had a tremendous influence in your life. So those are the two prompts. We're going to ask you to share stories, and then we're going to come back together.
We have arrived at the final and number 3 part of our set of questions. We recommend 15 to 30 minutes or more if you need for this set of reflection questions. We recommend you do this with a partner or with a small group of people. And we also recommend that your partner or your group mates go through questions number 1 and 2 to arrive at this set of questions and have an effective conversation about it. Thank you so much for taking this journey with us. We hope this has been helpful. We hope this has helped gain a sense of clarity, some energy, and a sense of connective tissue, like Dr. Christopher mentions. We at Synergos are creating a lot more content on dismantling racism, and we would love to hear from you on what that content should look like. Leave us a comment or reach out to us anytime on how this went for you. What more are you looking for? What would be most helpful to you in your work or in your community, or for some inner work for yourself? So do reach out to us at collaborate@synergos.org. We would love to hear from you. And thank you again so much.